And we'll click record. All right, cool.
Cool.
So we're doing this 12.11 lab, which has definitely given people a lot of trouble with, trying to figure this out. So we're going to go ahead and share screen, and hopefully it's showing
Yep,
that okay. Does that look good?
I got it. Yep.
All right. So
Like we were saying, the branch I got.
yeah, let's go to the instructions first and just
Okay, that's fine.
quickly recap this for everybody. So we're basically getting this file called studentinfo.tsv, and the students are going to have grades that look like this. So Eden Barrett, for example, is one of the students, and he got a 70 in the midterm one, 45 in the midterm two, and 59 in the final. And so what we have to do is export this into a file that's going to be report.txt, and it's going to assign a grade for each of those students. And we at the end of all that, we have to also provide in that file
Yeah.
the averages for the midterm one, midterm two, and the final, and those have to be to 2 decimal places. So I worked on this file a couple days ago. So I'm or a week or actually it's probably like a week or two ago now. And so I may have forgotten little things here and there. But as we go through, if you have any questions about it, stop me and we can definitely talk
Yep.
about it.
Yeah, it's fine.
So the first thing we're doing is the file name, which we're going to get the input from the user, and that's going to be the student info.tsv. That's where the input file is, and you can see over here download. You could actually download that yourself, and you'd be able to see what's in it.
Right.
And so that is going to take care of that because we just need the name of the file at this stage. And then new file equals report.txt. I'm just sort of like hard coding that in as what they told us this new file is going to be.
Would
Um,
input also work, or you're saying it'd be better if you just put the actual name?
Input would have also worked if you had another line for another line of input,
Oh, okay.
because that would, well, actually, I mean, we could experiment with it.
Well,
Um,
when you test it, do you have to put .tsv? Like, because I was trying to test it using the studentinfo.tsv, just using that.
mhm.
Does that work or no?
I haven't tested it without the .txt extension, but
Okay.
I would guess that if you're not specifically saying what it is, there might be a default that makes it into a text file.
Okay.
Um, but I'm actually not sure. We could kind of experiment with that.
Okay.
Um, so and we should experiment with these. Those kind of questions like what would happen if we did this? What would happen if we did that? You
Right.
definitely want to play with it and see those kind of questions. So
That's the
yeah,
best way that I figure out what's wrong is that I just keep throwing random things in the input and to see what's wrong with the code.
welcome to programming. That is exactly it.
Yeah.
That's what we do. So uh, but we'll come back to that. We'll circle back because
Yep.
I want to make sure we cover all the ground here before we go into any of the rabbit holes. So the function grading here is going to take the average for this class that the basically all of those grades averaged together. The 70, the 45, and the 59. When you average those grades, it comes out to a grade that's lower than 60. So that would give that student an F.
Right.
So it's going to catch uh, whichever one of these conditionals it falls into, and um, if it doesn't fit into any of these, then it's going to return F. So the person didn't earn enough points to get any of these other grades. So uh, that's what that function does. Is it just tells us what their final grade should be, and then the next, this is where 12.11, where this section is kind of introducing something new, which is reading a file. So this function of read file, what I'm doing is I'm using the with open command. So with open and file name, I'm getting that argument of file name, and I have to make sure that I pass whatever I got as the file name here, pass that for the read file, because that's the file that we're going to be opening.
Yeah.
And we're gonna read that file, and I'm putting it into this function. I'm getting it as file, right? So it's opening this file and calling it file, and we're going to return. There's a method on files that is called readlines, and what readlines is going to do is it's going to turn whatever that file contents is. It's going to turn it into a list of strings, which is exactly what we wanted. So without having to do a for loop and like manually do it, readlines just sort of gives you that list that you're looking for. So that's what I used for this. And so it's calling that method. Any questions so far about? Uh,
No, we were talking about it before you recorded, so that part does make sense. Yes.
okay, cool, cool. All right, so then next we're going to go to our function, which is compute grades. So what we're going to do is we're going to get those lines from the file here. So let me actually scroll down here a little bit
Oh
so you can
well, you
see.
typed a lot. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to go to, and there's probably more efficient ways of doing this.
Mhm.
And that's why I say, experiment with how you write your program, and you might find an easier way of approaching all this,
Yeah.
or at least less wordy, right? You definitely don't have to call things what I called them. Um, but so down here, this was the root. This was like my main. Um, and so what I'm doing is I'm taking lines that's going to be equal to the read file of the file name. So I got the file. Oops, I got the file name up here, and
Parsing.
then li lines is going to be read file of whatever that file name was. And then once I have those lines, I'm going to feed that to the compute grades function. So lines is going to be the argument for compute grades, and that's going to tell me the students. And then the output file, that's going to take students, and it's going to take new file, which we're
What's new file?
go up here. I declare what new file is. That's report.txt. That's going to be just the name of the file that I want to create.
And that's where you it lists all the grades and then right? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. That's what output file is going to do. It's going to take everything that I computed over here with students, and it's taking that students list, and it's taking the name of the new file, and it's plugging all those students information into that new file. And
Got it.
so it's really just 3 lines for my program, not including all the functions. you know,
Okay.
so so all these functions that are getting called here. Um, that's kind of where the meat of the program is, where the logic is. But this is all just function calls that achieve each of these things. All right, so going back to compute grades. So we gave it lines, and that was going to be a list of all the lines contained inside the file that was provided. So it's just a list of strings. I opened a new list called students, and then for line in lines, and remember that each of these is a string, what I did is last, first, midterm 1, midterm 2, final, and I split that. So remember that these are all tab separated. For
Okay.
whatever reason, I tried putting in uh, the
Oh,
uh,
the slash T.
yeah, the slash T, and it didn't like that. I ended up getting some errors when I did it this way. It works okay. It works fine with just the split. So I kept it as split, and even though they are tab separated for whatever reason, it didn't work out well when I tried that there.
Okay.
Um, uh, and so now that I've got this nicely split here, I've got these 5 variables that are equal to the contents of that line being split. And so midterm one, midterm two, final. And I turned all of these into integers. There's actually a more efficient way of doing this, like you could map it, but I I don't have they covered map in everything you've done so far?
No, I don't know what mapping is. Yeah, don't know what that is.
Okay, so uh, we could go into that another time, but
Right.
map is a nice function, but because I didn't think people were uh, familiar with it, I didn't want to like introduce too much new stuff here. So
There's a lot of functions that I just learned in a solid week span. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just so much coming at you in this course, and it feels like um, you know, it feels like there's always more that you have to know in order to make things work. And so that's why I figured I'll just keep that everything very simple with
when I'm doing
just
this, I have to always have the lesson up on my other monitor because I don't
yeah,
know which functions which to help me do what. So that's another part of this lab is that there's other functions that I was taught, but like they didn't go in depth in using it. So it's just like, what do I do?
yeah, yeah. So midterm one, midterm two, final. These are just integer variables. So I'm
Right.
just declaring those as variables. And then I'm taking each of those strings and I'm just like rewriting it as an integer, basically.
Okay.
So because in Python, you have dynamic typing, which means that it midterm one started off being a string and I'm turning it into an integer. So you can't do that in every language, but you can do that in Python.
Okay.
And all right, so now all of these strings have been transformed into integers and I can play with
Well,
them a little bit.
I was gonna say, isn't it better because then by using it as an integer, you can get the average and you can morph it more.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right.
You could still get the average if you wanted to use the enumerate function.
Okay.
So even on strings, you can get the average and you can do mathematical operations with it, but it's a little more abstract and I wouldn't recommend doing that just yet unless you have a good reason for it. Um, so it's easier to deal with integers, I think. So we're just turning everything into integers and going along with that. So average equals all of the grades added up divided by 3 because there's 3 grades in the class. Nice, straightforward. Everything's equally weighted. And so grade equals grading average, where we're passing to the grading function whatever that average value was. And remember that our grading function, it's going to fall into one of these buckets, and whichever one is the right
We'll return the grade.
interval, I guess.
Hmm.
That's the one that's going to catch it. So some of these are going to be A's, some of them are going to be B's, and so on. So that's going to get us the grade for that individual student. Because remember that we're doing this 4 line in lines with each line representing a new student.
Well,
And then as you might have predicted, that students list that we opened up here, we're going to start appending to it. So students.append, and we're going to give the last, first, midterm one, midterm two, final. And now we have this new variable that we've just computed called the grade.
mhm.
And once I have that, I am returning students. I actually don't think, oh, yeah, no, I do have to do that because I declared students for whatever reason, I declared it within this function itself.
Yeah.
And so if I didn't do this return students, then as soon as the function was over, all of the contents of students would be gone because the scope of students is just within that one function. It's not a global. So I would have had to have declared students out here if I didn't want to have to do this return function here.
Got it. Would it give you an error though? If you didn't have return students, or would it just
I would have lost the information
it
that I
would just say
just
nothing? Okay.
gathered here. Yeah, that I just computed. I would have lost that grade and there just wouldn't have been uh, there would have been no list called students because as soon as a function completes, whatever was declared inside of that function is going to be gone. So within the scope of that function, students exist within the scope of that function. And if I want it to exist outside of the function, I have to return it
Um,
as,
that makes sense. Got it.
yeah. So return students is going to bring that back over
The divide.
uh, over here. So it's saving it as students. So compute grades was the function that was completed, and then I'm saving this with the same name. So I could have called it something else outside of the function, but I'm still calling it students because that's what it was. So return students. So now students is filled with all those values, and I can put that as one of the arguments in output file, and of course new file. As a reminder, that was up here, something that we got from
Yep.
the instructions that we had to call it report.txt. And so that's the new file over here. So now output file, what's that going to do? Well, we go over here to output file, and what it's going to do is it's going to take, so I did new lines as a string, and midterm sum equals midterm sum 2 equals final sum equals 0. This is just my way of initializing all of these sums for the entire course, because we have to get the average for the course. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through student by student, and I'm going to add whatever their midterm 1, whatever their midterm 2, and whatever their final was. And I just kept this as the second index, the third index, and the fourth index in the student list. So I didn't actually make new variables for that. The program's already long enough. I just used whatever the index was that was associated with um, the midterm 1 and the midterm 2 and the final. Because if you go back up here, remember
Mm-hmm.
this would be 0, this would be 1, 2, 3, and 4 as the indices of those 5 variables.
So I'm confused. So you already have the average there, and then scroll up again. Why are we doing a second? Or I guess it's not a second, but is it because there's different? You're doing an average for all the grades, or just for one of the grades? That's where I'm lost for a second. I don't know why.
So within compute grades, this average was computing the average for an individual student and then using that average to obtain the grade
For
for
one.
that individual student.
Okay.
What what output file is doing, and again, this is I've told you before that I try to separate out all of the responsibilities that a function has, so that each function only has one responsibility. That's my preference when I'm programming. That's good practice, but I don't always achieve that necessarily. And this is one of those cases where output file is actually doing a couple different things. So
Yeah.
it might get a little bit confusing here. And if I refactored it, I would probably separate this out into a different into a different function, because it does kind of have multiple
You got
duties here.
round in there too, and then yeah, there's the map you were talking about. I have no idea what that is. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is I'm going through student by student,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm adding up again the appropriate index in
Yep.
the student list based on the order here. So last being index 0, first being index 1, midterm 1 is index 2. So that's why I'm adding um, the, the student index 2 for the midterm sum. And I'm going to do that for each of those students. So it's going to cycle through, and it's going to take their midterm 2 and add that to the sum. It's going to take their final and add that their final and add that to the sum. And then what new lines is going to do is it's going to add a tab separated list as so this is, you've probably seen dot join for when you're dealing with lists to turn
Yeah.
it back into a string.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing that with this tab separator. So that's the separation between each of the items in that list.
Okay.
And I actually did end up using map here. So what map does, just to give you like a really quick
Mm-hmm.
summary of it, is you have to give it an iteratable um,
Value.
variable here, or argument. You have to give it an iteratable argument. So for example, a list or a dictionary or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave it the student list, and then you're giving it a function that you want to be applied to every item within that iteratable list.
Okay.
And so um, it's going to take all of those values in the list of student, and it's going to run the string function on it. In other words, it's going to turn them all from being integers back into being strings. So this is another way of doing what we had done up here, um,
Right there, yeah.
right here, where I turned those three values into integers, and so this is one way of doing it. And then another way of doing it, you're seeing down here where I'm keeping it as a single list and I'm iterating over it. So where was that? That's this part over here. So new lines is becoming a string where I'm joining the contents of this iteratable once I have turned each of the individual values in the student list into strings. And then at the end, um, after it does all that, then at the end, I'm adding a new line to basically finish that off, and send it to the next line. So that's what it's doing each
Each time.
for each student, because remember that that's for student in students. So student is one line of the um,
File.
of the students, that whole
Next file.
um, yeah, that whole file. Um, so where was I? So, okay, so num students, this is where I got the length of the students. You've
Oh,
seen other people use count. Either way is perfectly fine. So like you're counting up how many students are in the class, and then that's what you're going to divide by. I just took the length of what that list is because the only contents in it are the students. And so however many students there are, that's going to be um, the total number of students in the class, and so that's the number of students. And we're going to divide that. So we're going to take the midterm sum one and
mhm.
divide it by the num students, and midterm sum two divided by the num students, and the final sum and divided by the num students. This round and two is when I was trying to do it that way. It didn't work out well, and the reason why is because if it could round to less, it'll do that. So for example, um, let's say it's like 20, let's say their final was, oh, that's really low. Let's make it a little bit higher. So let's say that it was 79 0.58. Well, then this would have worked okay. But if it was 79.50,
That's still round up.
then what round two does is it changes that to 79.5,
Oh,
and it drops off the O, or it drops off the zero, I mean. And so I wanted to display two decimal places always, because if you look at the, I'm gonna clear that,
so that's
and
what it asks you to do, yeah.
yeah, if you look at the, like when you run the program and check it, it wants it to be in two decimal places, even if it's not necessary, even if you have a zero as the second decimal there. So that's why I started with the round two, but that wasn't good enough. And what I ended up using was .2f formatting, and it even says that in the directions up here. It says
But
something about, make sure that you're formatting, somewhere it says that, use format specification. So that's what they were referring to, is that .2f within your um, within your formatting right over here. So that colon .2f, um, in this line, that's what that's doing, is it's displaying two places.
with the round, can you explain that again one more time? Sorry, because it's rounding the average. I don't know why it's confusing me. 'Cause I've never
So
used round before.
yeah, so what round is doing is it just rounds whatever float you get, and I'm getting a float
Oh,
because
flow, that's right. Okay.
yeah. So you wouldn't really need round for an integer, but what I'm doing is I'm taking an integer and I'm dividing it by another integer, and I'm often going to be getting floats out of that. Not
Okay.
always, but
Sometimes.
a lot of the time I'm going to be getting floats. And so round is going to be important to limit the results on that. I don't want to have like 20 different decimal places. But and I was just going to excuse me, I was just going to take midterm average 1 and have it in here, and you know and with the curly braces, and then have that be that. But that didn't end up working. I needed to put the .2f. I needed to put that in there
Otherwise, it'd be
because there were occasions where round would round it to the nearest tenth, or round it to the nearest hundredth. I needed to always round to the nearest hundredth.
good. Okay, that makes
So
sense.
yeah, so .2f will format it that way no matter what. Round will sometimes format it that way if it's necessary to, but not if it's not necessary to. So and then with open new file, um, th this part right here where I'm opening a new file with write as file, and then file dot write new lines, that remember that new lines was collected up here as an argument for the output file, and it was provided here. That new file was declared as the report.txt, which is what I want that file to be named as. So that's where this is all coming together. So really, it's this part here that this function is well named for, this output file. So just this portion of that is really what I should have called the output file. And then all of this stuff right here, I should have called like class averages or something like that. The logic would have been, um, better called something else. And I'm doing multiple things within the same function.
Okay.
So again, this is not like optimal clean coding
Well, look.
because
Okay.
it works.
Right.
It'll still get the job done, but it's a little bit more confusing because I crammed so much into a single function.
I was gonna say because with the rounding, you'd probably split the round off into a separate. Is that what you would do? You'd split that off?
Yeah, so what I could do is I could get this new lines right here. I could have just passed it new lines, and then the output file would have accepted new lines as an argument, and it would have printed out that file and completed the assignment. But I just put it all into a single function because I was like, all right, I've spent enough time on this. This is enough, and I just sort of didn't refactor it. But that would be an improvement on the code to
Okay.
uh, to create another function and have all of this logic here that would obtain the new lines. This whole code block here really could be its own function called like class averages or something like that.
Okay. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now, if assuming I didn't mess anything up, it should run. So uh, hopefully, as I was moving the mouse cursor over,
See,
I
your
didn't
program
mess
produced
anything
no
up.
output. So why didn't
So
you?
yeah. So I clicked on run program and it didn't do anything. Program output display here. Your program produced no output
Yeah.
because there was no print in here. This the completion of this assignment requires you to create a new file, and that new file is going to contain everything that needs to be there. So you do see it when you submit for grading. So I'll go ahead and submit for grading.
Oh, that's weird. I guess that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah. So submission passed all tests, total score 10 out of 10, and it's because it's taking it's giving the input file of, that's the file contents, and then the output. Um, oh
Depends
yeah,
on
it
the
says your
file.
file. This was my file's contents. So the input was studentinfo.tsv, and then this was studentinfo1. So you could see that you wouldn't want to hard code it as student info because sometimes it's named something else.
Right. And
And
that's why
so
I was confused about how am I going to test if the code's even right, because if it's not going to take the TSV, yeah.
yeah, that exactly because it could work for this one case. So you do not want to hard code this as file name equals student info, and this confirms exactly why, because this one
Right.
it would not have been read or
I've noticed that in ZyBooks, they love to throw different names at you to make sure
that's
it's
right.
actually.
Yep. It makes sure that you're actually collecting the name of the file as that input. And again, I would say an even better way um, of doing this, and let's see if it works. You know,
Mess with it.
um,
Oh,
just to
so you're
mess
gonna
with it.
change it
Yeah.
to just input
Yeah. So
TXT
so
or no?
I'm gonna cut this, and actually, you know what I'm gonna do? I am gonna comment this. This is better practice. I'm gonna comment this out, and I'm gonna say new file equals input, and I'm gonna take this and copy it. And this way, if it doesn't work out the way I wanted, I can just very quickly, um, let's see, these are my inputs, right? If the input of the
Mhm.
file is that, where's my inputs? Oh no, it doesn't give you the option to input, does it?
You gotta go to the develop mode. Or,
Develop mode, of
yeah,
course, yes.
yep.
So, so I'm going to put another line, and I'm going to call it report.txt,
Oh,
and
so you
and
okay.
so I'm collecting that as an input, and I'm just curious if that causes any issues, or if that still runs just fine. So we'll see. And
No,
it
see,
did cause an issue. So your program
trigger when
produced
reading the line. Yeah.
no output because it says could not find file report.txt. And what if I did this and submitted that?
Well, I don't think that's gonna change the submission because
Yeah,
you're
no,
changing that in the input.
yeah. So um, that still wasn't an issue because it says end of file
Yeah.
when reading a line, new file equals input. So it did not work well, and I'm just gonna. It's not necessary to have flexible, you know, report names. So it wants it to be called report.txt in all cases. I'll just leave that hard coded, and that worked.
And then
Um,
when it
so
tries to test it, it'll change it from one to two or three, whatever it is.
yeah, so it's always going to issue the results as report.txt, no matter what the file name that we're collecting it from is called. So student info one, student info two, doesn't matter. It's always going to output it as report.txt, which is what they wanted. So they wanted, it says um, output last names, first names, exam scores, and letter grades of students into a text file named report.txt. So there's
Yep.
never going to be any other name. I was just putting that flexibility in there because what if the user did want a different name?
Yeah.
So if I were doing this outside of a grading context and just like trying to write something like this, I would allow the user to change that
Yeah.
too. It would just kind of be like a nice touch to have an input there. But if it breaks our code and our grading, it's not worth messing
Right,
with.
exactly.
So what questions do you have for me?
No, I mean that basically I just need to do more of it, to be honest. I mean, when you break it down between each, I mean, section of the code, it makes more sense because it's things that I've already learned,
Mhm.
minus the mapping or the round that I haven't done much over, but like everything else makes a lot more sense. It's just this lab is almost like a mini final because it's multiple different concepts that we've already learned all into
Yeah,
one.
yeah. I mean, you can see it took me like 60 lines of code to put this thing together,
Exactly. Exactly.
and it could be done more efficiently. There are faster approaches, um,
Mhm.
and there are more streamlined things I could have done. Um, but it's not too bad, and still it took me quite a while. It took
Yeah, we had group chats going on for a solid hour or two trying to figure it out, and we all had brain deads.
yeah, it's a challenging problem. It really is. And so good job to everybody for giving it a good try and putting a lot of effort into that. And I hope that that explanation helps.
It does, yeah. Thank you so much. I don't have any other questions other than that, so that makes sense in the lab at least.
All right, cool. Well, I'll see you guys next time or maybe next class, because it sounds like you guys are coming to the end of it. But
Yep.
there's still that final to do as well. So hopefully
Mhm. Oh,
we'll
yeah.
get to work on that. So all right, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yep.